Hello and welcome to this week's edition of World Today, where we will be talking about an exclusive report from Sri Lanka on the economic crisis that led to Mahinda Rajapaksa's resignation. But first up, the headlines. Ranil Wickremesinghe took oath as the new Sri Lankan Prime Minister after Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned following month-long protests against the government's handling of the economic crisis. Moscow has threatened Helsinki with retaliatory actions if Finland becomes a NATO member. The son of former Philippines leader Ferdinand Marcos Sr., popularly known as Bongbong, has won the presidential election with a vast majority, defeating Vice President Leni Robredo. And women in Afghanistan have come out into the streets protesting against Taliban's new decree that women should cover their face when they are in public. The massive civil unrest in Sri Lanka has seen a temporary impasse after Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe took office. This after Mahinda Rajapaksa had to resign because of the economic crisis. But locals continue to bear the brunt of the difficult situation that the country is in. Here's a report from the ground.
A temporary relief to the political impasse in Sri Lanka. Veteran Ranil Wickremesinghe was sworn in as a Prime Minister to try and steer the island nation out of its economic mess. A four-time Prime Minister, Ranil replaces Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was unceremoniously ousted earlier this week. Mahinda, blamed for creating economic turmoil, has taken refuge at the Trincomalee naval base. He and his loyalists have been barred from leaving the country. Protesters have abated after shoot-at-sight orders and strict curfew. A brief respite was given for people to buy essentials.
If you think that these vehicles have been halted because of a traffic jam, well, you're mistaken. This is the traffic, the queue for filling petrol and diesel into their vehicles. What we are seeing here in Sri Lanka is immense shortage of fuel, and vehicles have to wait for hours together to get their petrol tanks filled. We're seeing here on the pavements, two-wheelers have been parked and people have been waiting for hours together, hoping that they will be able to get at least a little bit of fuel to ensure that they can go about with their day-to-day activities. This is one of the tragic scenarios that we're seeing in Sri Lanka since this economic crisis that started.
I've been here since last night, and just a couple of minutes ago only we managed to get a fuel tank, and so unfortunate situation for Sri Lankans because we are wasting our valuable time.
Prices of fruits and vegetables have gone up and people are facing the brunt.
We're being told that cabbages are sold for around 400 rupees, which was earlier around 200. And similarly, we're being told that beans is being sold for 550 rupees, which was earlier only around 400 or 350 rupees.
பிரச்சனை வராம இருக்குமா அண்ணனடா கொண்டு போய் ரொம்ப கஷ்டப்படுறாங்களே எங்களுக்கு தொழில் பாதிச்சு எல்லாமே பாதிப்பா இருக்கு அப்ப எப்படிமா நாங்க ஜீவிக்கிறது
Everything is very high. पूरा सामान बहुत हाई है. ये सामान लेने के लिए आदमी का बहुत मुश्किल है तो पूरा आदमी का इधर काम नहीं.
But Lanka remains on the edge. Spiraling prices, fuel and food shortage has crippled the country. New Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has a huge task on his hands to put the country back on rails. With Akshayanath in Colombo, Bureau Report, India Today.
On Spotlight this weekend, India Today's Akshayanath spoke with Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. Take a look.
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister,
are you confident there's a way out of this crisis? Are you confident there's a way out of this crisis, Prime Minister? Are you confident there's a way out of this crisis, economic crisis?
Are you confident?
We are facing a crisis. We have to get out of it.
Yeah, are you confident you can do it?
Yeah, we'll do it.
So what do you think will be the first step forward for you?
Excuse me. get into the Prime Minister's office tomorrow morning.
Sir, is there an action plan? Have you listed out the ministers?
We have an economic action plan, and we'll work on it. The crucial ministers will be appointed soon.
There's a worst economic crisis in the country.
Yes.
So it's a challenging time. It's going to be very difficult. Are you afraid of the future?
No, I always take a challenge.
And what are the promises that you're giving the people, sir?
Nothing.
The people, how do you think you can reassure them?
I will lift up the economy and ensure we have enough foreign exchange and government revenue.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for talking to us. That was Ranil Wickremesinghe talking exclusively to India today, stating that he will be reviving the economy and bringing Sri Lanka forward as a successful nation. With camera person Divyan from Colombo, this is Akshanath for India Today.
In another big story, protests erupted in the Philippines after the return of the Marcos family in Malacanang Presidential Palace following the landslide victory of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Here's a report.
The victory of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and his return to the Malacanang Presidential Palace has brought back memories of the brutal martial law that was imposed by his father, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in the Philippines. After the landslide victory of Marcos Jr., victims of martial law still await justice.
It is very horrible what happened to us. There is still no justice. They've yet to apologize to what the Marcos family has done. We feel the pain doubled, even tripled. It is as if they've added salt to injury.
Ferdinand Marcos Jr., popularly called Bong Bong, defeated Vice President Leni Robredo with a margin of almost 30 million votes. As Marcos Jr. swept the polls, Filipinos and martial law victims staged protests outside the country's election commission.
We saw the need to mobilize ourselves because we have heard reports of cheating, malfunctioning vote counting machines, forms of harassment from the Electoral Board and police, other forms of harassment of poll watchers and instances of vote buying. So, all of these are very alarming.
Marcos Jr.'s slogan was, "Together we shall rise again," invoking his father's authoritarian regime, which his supporters and family have called a golden era in their online campaign. The campaign whitewashed the past brutalities inflicted on the people during his father's regime. After the victory, Bong Bong's spokesperson echoed the leader's message to the world, urging them not to judge him by his family's past.
Bong Bong looks forward to working across the Philippines and with international partners and organizations to address critical issues facing the country and to begin delivering for the Filipino people. To the world, he says, "Judge me not by my ancestors, but by my actions."
Marcos Jr., however, has not acknowledged or apologized for the atrocities during his father's regime. He is expected to continue his predecessor's policies on infrastructure and the controversial war on drugs.
The oppression of women continues in Afghanistan. In the latest decree, the Taliban has ordered that women cover their faces in public. Should they not follow this decree and the order, their father or male relative will be either put behind bars or will lose his job. Afghan women have come out onto the streets to protest against the Taliban decree. The West has criticized this new decree and says this will further push the Afghan women to the dark era and strip them of their fundamental rights. Women in Afghanistan mostly wear headscarves for religious reasons, but in urban areas they don't cover their faces. Though the Taliban claims that they have changed since their last rule, but they continue to ban women from traveling alone. Women have to be accompanied by male chaperone. Earlier, secondary schools for girls were to be opened since the time the Taliban seized power. But a Taliban order closed the schools indefinitely. They blamed lack of availability of teachers and said that an appropriate, conducive environment was needed to be created for girls to study.
These are women who have grown up with the opportunities that they're entitled to, and that women in Afghanistan did not have 20 years ago. They've benefited from education, a thriving cultural environment, the ability to work and make decisions about their own future. Women were 20% of the workforce before the Taliban took over. And now the Taliban is seeking to strip all of that away.
Now, Beijing's zero-COVID policy has taken a toll on China's biggest city, Shanghai. Following harshest lockdown since the outbreak in early March, China is now considering opening up the city. But what is the toll that it has taken on the residents and businesses of the city of Shanghai? Here's a report.
Weeks-long draconian lockdown in China's largest city, Shanghai, has left locals crippling with their deteriorating mental health. And with the suspension of delivery services, residents are complaining about food shortages. Shanghai, China's commercial hub of 25 million people, faced COVID outbreak in early March, and since then, it has been put under severe restrictions by the authorities.
We are striving to realize zero existence of positive cases at the community level by mid-May. Then, Shanghai will gradually reopen in an orderly manner and allow limited regular flow under effective control and classified management.
It took only 2 new cases outside the areas facing the strictest curbs in Shanghai for officials to make the restrictions more painful this week. The emergence of new cases, even after Beijing's zero-COVID policy, makes it clear how difficult it is for China to tackle highly transmissible Omicron variant. With harshest restrictions in place, Shanghai residents find it hard to look for a normal life. China is living a dystopian nightmare. Strict curbs are causing significant economic damage and disruptions in trade and supply chains. Companies like Tesla and now Toyota have halted their production in Shanghai. The threat is now looming on China's capital, Beijing. With mass testing and minor restrictions, will Beijing be the second city facing the harshest lockdown ever? Bureau Report, India Today.
Time now for some other news from across the world in World at a Glance.
Finland's leaders are in favor of applying for NATO membership. Kremlin has threatened retaliation, calling Finland's move a threat to Russia. Sweden too is expected to join the NATO soon. A 90-year-old former cardinal was arrested by the Hong Kong National Security Police on suspicion of collusion with foreign forces, a charge under the national security law. Joseph Zen is one among the 4 high-profile pro-democracy activists arrested by the Hong Kong National Security Police. If he is convicted, he will be sentenced to life in prison. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wore a face mask during a meeting on state television. The meeting acknowledged the first COVID-19 outbreak in the country, following which the country has imposed a nationwide lockdown. A state service was organized for Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in Palestine's Ramallah, a day after she was killed by Israeli forces. Large number of Palestinians attended the ceremony. President Mohammed Abbas bid her farewell at the presidential compound. Shireen Abu was covering Israeli raid on Jenin city in the West Bank.
That's all we have have in this edition of World Today. Stay tuned for all the news and updates here on India Today.